Joining us now, as supposedly removing federal troops from Portland was going to stop the riots. We're approaching 80 days of it. Deputy Assistant Director of the Department of Homeland Security and former Virginia Senator and Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli is on with us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. How's everything going at the Department of Homeland Security, Ken?
Well, everything is quite a sweep for the Department of Homeland Security with COVID and violence across in a couple of cities around the country. I won't say across the country because most of the violence going on is just spikes of local violence like you've seen in Chicago, and you've seen those numbers. Heck, even in Portland, they're having community violence in addition to the protest violence you've seen, so-called protests. You can't say protest and violence at the same time. As I said on Tuesday, protesters are not rioters, and rioters are not protesters.
Well, is it unfair to point out that the First Amendment says peaceably right there in the middle of it?
Joe, one of the most amazing presentations on this is the Chicago Police Superintendent Brown's July 20th press conference, and I'd urge your listeners, pull it up on YouTube. You just got to watch the first 14 minutes, and he will show you literally with aerial footage and a comprehensive walkthrough of the, as Calvin would have said in Calvin and Hobbes, the transmogrification of what appears to be peaceful protest into a clearly large-scale planned act of violence. And he had 49 injuries to his officers that day.
Gosh.
And it's just the best one I've seen anywhere in the country. It is well worth watching. July 20th press conference by Chicago Police Superintendent Brown.
We'll send a link out to it when I post this up as a podcast later, Ken. And I hear the plaints, and I was a Tea Party organizer back in 2009, Jefferson area Tea Party, and I know the lengths that Carol Thorpe, the chair, went through in event planning for a little nonprofit in Charlottesville to make sure that they secured their members from character assassination. They were worried about people showing up from the Lyndon LaRouche Society or places like that would say, "Hey, look at me! I have a picture of Barack Obama as Hitler," and casting that aspersion. Yet I hear the defenders of these protesters saying, oh, well, now the protesters are having their events co-opted by violent extremists. It used to be that they were just mostly peaceful protesters. Now the protesters are having their events hijacked. Is there any truth to that at all, or is this just a convenient excuse to say, oh, well, they were protesting racism, and then a bunch of people showed up with a pallet full of bricks?
So there is some truth to it, and but there's also a situation. This began with George Floyd's death at the hands of a police officer, which we all saw, and it was horrific in Minneapolis. And the assault in the third I think it was the third precinct in Minneapolis, has been extensively written up by the assaulters themselves. And they speak about the different roles different people in the crowd play, including what appear to be otherwise peaceful protesters. This is the line of umbrellas you see up front. Well, they're not executing violence themselves. They're shielding others to prepare and execute violence behind them. And just by way of example. And they would say they're stopping pepper spray. But if you watch the use of the tactic, pepper spray doesn't get deployed unless there is a conflict, and they're shielding a conflict. So there's all sorts of dynamics like that. You'll get lasers used in the eyes of officers now from a distance, while people up close, it's a way of sort of chasing officers off while you, for instance, tear down a fence or take an act much closer to the officers that they would otherwise defend. So all those coordinated tactics are being used more broadly all around the country.
I feel weird about this because I almost feel like I was part of a dress rehearsal for this in 2017 here in Charlottesville when, Virginia State police officers were ordered to evacuate Robert E. Lee Park in Charlottesville, onto a street. They said push David Duke and Dick Spencer and people who have horrific beliefs about race and human value, push them onto the streets with people who are violently opposed to them and then act surprised that a riot ensued. But then coincidentally, those riots became video fodder, Jerry Nadler notwithstanding, for the anti-Ed Gillespie gubernatorial campaign ads that PACs were starting to run saying, these are Ed Gillespie supporters. Don't vote for Ed. Vote for Ralph Northam. And I almost, you hear Jerry Nadler say this in a hearing, and all of a sudden the LED light went on in my head, Ken, and you know how dim that can be sometimes. But all of a sudden I said, hold it. I've been in this story before. Riots become campaign footage, and then the campaign footage says don't vote for these people because the rioters support them. I'm very concerned that we're just watching a nationwide rollout of what they practiced in Charlottesville.
Yeah, the difference with Charlottesville is you had the white supremacist folks who are evil themselves. And as you note, they weren't separated from the Antifa folks. And so you just get these street battles. And policing 101 with oppositional crowds is they both get to protest. But the police in that situation are supposed to keep them separated. And the police knew that. The way that was all executed bordered on incompetent. And, didn't border on incompetent. It was incompetent. And not by the officers, let's be very clear.
But now the police...
But out in Portland, Joe, you just have, like, Antifa anarchists and so forth. I mean, as much of a concern as what I'll call the lethality of white supremacists is, when we see those folks strike around the country, we're just past 1 year from that Walmart attack down in El Paso, for instance. Mm-hmm. It's very deadly. But these Antifa things going on and anarchists are all over the country. And in 2 months, we haven't really seen the kind of clash that you described in Charlottesville. It's been very one-sided. The clash is with law enforcement and, frankly, their own communities. I mean, the destruction these people are wreaking in their own communities is just incredible.
Well, is the call to dismantle and defund, depending on when you catch them, they're saying dismantle until you catch them, and then they say, oh, no, I just mean move money to social workers. Really an assault on private property ownership, because that is what law enforcement in its essence is there to protect, is your private property ownership, your privacy, your free speech rights, your God-given rights are supposed to be defended by law enforcement. I think this is existentially at least an assault on that, Ken.
Joe, the people hurt the worst with defunding police. And look at what's going on in New York. They cut that budget by 25%. Mm-hmm. The neighborhoods that are going to be hurt the worst are the ones that have the most crime. They're the poorest, they have the least family stability, and they are overwhelmingly and disproportionately minority. So let's not kid ourselves about who's going to be hurt the most by this effort. And the people who are pushing it are often pushing it because the police are what stand between them and their use of violence to further their own goals. It'd be like, the Soviet Union in the Cold War lobbying and protesting America having a military. You have to shrink your military, and us doing it.
That's right.
That'd be the national version. And that's what you have people like Bill de Blasio doing, and the Minneapolis Stupid Council, and people like that all around the country. And the people who are going to pay the price, sadly, are the ones who need that police protection the most. And frankly, if you're thinking of building a business in Portland, I mean, unless you're drinking some kind of crazy Kool-Aid, that decision's been made for you in the last couple of months.
Yeah.
The hope that the years of rioting since President Trump was elected, they've just been in a permanent temper tantrum in Portland. That your business will be safe. Go ask Amazon and go ask Starbucks that in Seattle, their hometown, as we watched crowds tear through them mercilessly and burn them out and destroy their facilities. That's what they do to the homegrown hometown business.
But you bring up the point that's been brought up plenty of times, that these are all cities that can't even point to the last living human conservative that held a spot on city council, or whether it's Richmond or Portland or Chicago. I mean, this is all progressive policies lying to, even in the most honest brokering. If you go into the poorest communities, these people have been told since 1964, vote for us, vote for my party, and you'll get your life, your life will get better. And eventually people start saying, hey, that's not happening. So even at the most honest level, this is progressive liberal policies hiding behind the law enforcement, blaming law enforcement for laws that these people enacted.
Very well put, Joe. I wouldn't even just say laws they enacted, because it's full-blown policies. And they're policies that destroy human dignity and destroy communities slowly but surely. As a friend of mine from law school once said, the surest way short of a bomb to destroy a city is rent control. And, it's that kind of mentality. And when you couple all those policies together, bundle them together, you destroy a community. And that's what you're seeing in these cities that have been governed by the left exclusively for so long. They've had their experiments, and they have failed. Ideas have consequences. I would also point out that relative to the violence you're seeing, those people, you and I are talking about implementing those policies over many years, and you'll appreciate this history. To me, they're the Mensheviks. To these violent protesters, Bolsheviks. I mean, when you watch...
Wow.
And for people listening, the Mensheviks were the socialists, or fairly radical socialists, in Russia when they took over from the Tsar. And those people were eaten alive, by which I mean killed, by the Bolsheviks because they were nowhere near radical enough. So you see a Mayor Wheeler of Portland go out and speak to the crowd as if they're his people, and he's their little hero. And they shout him down. They're calling for his resignation. This is a guy who publicly withdraws police protection from federal facilities, basically declaring open season.
Right.
And he's not radical enough for them. They're calling for his resignation. When he went out to speak to them, his own police that night had to declare a riot. That's how supportive they were of him.
Well, we saw it during...
And so thus my Menshevik to their Bolshevik analogy.
We saw it at the end of the Occupy Charlottesville. Remember Occupy Wall Street? They burned Dave Norris, the mayor of Charlottesville, in effigy, despite the fact that he had bent over backwards to get them extra weeks of time in the park there. Ken, you're Secretary of Homeland Security. So Homeland Security's role in this, is there or are there outside forces? Is it just Spurious George and the Tides Foundation, or are there other outside forces that we need to be worried about, as terrorism? I mean, Homeland Security, I talked to Tom Ridge before he even left to Washington to start Department of Homeland Security, defending us against terrorism. Is this being manipulated internationally to create this kind of unrest in our country?
So the international interplay here is pretty much similar to what they do everywhere else. They take any divisive issue and they play both sides hot and cold. And their goal, the Russians are the ones everybody looks to for this, but the Iranians do this, and though they're not nearly as good at it in terms of what they produce, and the Chinese do it. The Chinese are more overt. they've been making statements like, "Oh, you criticize us for Hong Kong. Look at these massive violations you're doing." These are people who are holding over 1 million Uyghurs as slaves in their country.
Right.
So telling us we're hypocrites on human rights. So we do see that kind of play. So it's a destabilization effort by our primary enemies,
Mm-hmm.
China, first among them, Russia, also in the great power contest, as well as Iran is trying to get into the act. And what you'll see, so I myself Googled the viral video of the CBP officers who detained an individual, all properly identified and identifying themselves properly and doing everything legally correctly, by the way. The video came up. It was 2 days after it had been posted. And the very first article, and I saved a picture of this on my phone, was by RT.com, RussiaTimes.com. Now, they had to pay to come up first. No,
right.
It isn't like they're getting so many clicks on RT.com in the United States that they come to the top of the search engine, right? They want to highlight this. They want to talk about this. And they want to drive two narratives. In that particular article, they were attempting to try to make the administration look bad in its response to the violence. And, they never just objectively report. They are there with other goals that are national level competition. And so that's going on. I wouldn't say that they're instigating any of this. They're taking advantage of it as best they can. That's what they're doing.
I promise this is the last one before staff comes after me, Ken. But I get so few times to talk to you. I have to ask you about the vote suppression that this creates. We're talking about the Albemarle Board of Supervisors taking down a statue celebrating a civilian defending his community. And we talk about 52% of the active voters not turning out in a precinct in Albemarle County that Donald Trump actually carried the last time a supervisor. But I think these riots, these protests, this violence has a subtext to drive people that don't go along to stay home, don't support a candidate, don't get out and vote, don't put a yard sign in. I think this is as bad a case of vote suppression and political suppression as I've ever seen in a free country. Am I wrong?
Well, Joe, mobs are scary. I mean, they're scary when you get caught up in one, and if they turn on you, and they use that. They're here. This is a lot of this qualifies quite easily as terrorism, and let's call it what it is. It isn't just mere violence. When you direct violence at government for the purpose of intimidating and changing policies by that violence, that's terrorism. That's what this is. And, we have the concern in all respects, whether it's at the point of voting, which was obviously critical. It's foundational to our constitutional republic. And we're going to pay close attention to that. But states are in charge of elections. Constitution says so. We can run our investigations and we can run people down who are doing illegal activity as best we can. But the federal government doesn't police cities. It doesn't step in and replace local and state police. And that is not going to happen. So the accountability is going to remain overwhelmingly locally and at the state level to accomplish the kind of protection you're talking about.
Well, and it's not just the votes itself. I'm talking about even just getting out and supporting or being seen on VPAP as contributing to, the wrong political candidate, and all of a sudden your business gets, it's like the mobs of Chicago back in the day, Ken. I appreciate your time.
Well, on the business front, Goya's done okay with their boycott. You can't buy that stuff, and everybody's buying it up like crazy as a way of supporting them.
Yeah, it's true. My wife's cabinet is full of Goya beans now, and so's my stomach. So that said, I've got to get the news going here, Ken. It's so great to catch up with you. Thank you for joining us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. On behalf of all of us here at the Virginia Institute and all the great radio stations that carry us, until next week, I'm Joe Thomas. So long, and thanks for all the fish.